Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
I want to thank Jess. I want to thank you guys for allowing me to participate in my own recovery program. I'm grateful. I'm grateful to be here. I'm an alcoholic. My name's Randy Hagler. Hi, everybody. It is good to be here. What a miracle. And I know what my trip was for now, to meet Jess and his family. You know, I was sitting in the airport yesterday morning in Charlotte, North Carolina, and there's an old gentleman sat down beside me, and he said, "You going to Houston, Texas, boy?" And it seemed like everybody calls me boy. And I said, "Yes, sir, I am." He said, "What in the world could you have lost in Houston, Texas?" I said, "Sir, I hadn't lost anything in Houston, Texas. It's what I'm going to find. It's what I'm going after. I'm going to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous." He said, "Oh, no, you're not." I said, "Yes, sir, I am." He said, "Good luck to you." And you know, God, you know, there's still people out there that act like they've never heard of recovery and Alcoholics Anonymous. And I really believe this old gentleman hadn't. But I am grateful, and I found what I came for here since I've been here Friday, and thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of something good. I've been a part of bad things all my life. I like to look around and see smiling faces, and there's a lot of smiling faces in Houston, Texas. So thank you. Thank you, Houston, Texas, and thank you, Alcoholics Anonymous, for the second chance I got in life. I'll forever be grateful. I am a member of the Queen City group of Alcoholics Anonymous in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we're probably the largest group in North Carolina. It's a big group. We got a lot of young people, got a lot of old sobriety there. You know, we have meetings on Monday night and Friday night, and Friday night our meeting is, this time of year, it's kind of like a fashion show, you know. The young ladies and the guys compete on who can dress the best, but still you got the old timers there carrying that message of hope. So I don't care how you get there. And if you ever come to Charlotte, North Carolina, and you want to go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous or a fashion show, you give me a call. You give me a call, and we'll go out to eat some dinner, and I'll take you to my home group because I love my home group. And I hope you love your home group too, no matter what the deal is, whether it be a fashion show or a discussion meeting. You know, I am grateful. By the grace of God, and because Alcoholics Anonymous works in my life today, one day at a time, I haven't had the need, nor have I picked up a drink since May 27th of 1996. Now, that may not impress you guys, but it impresses me. And it impresses my little wife sitting back at home, and my daughter, and my dog, and my bird, and the police in Shuffletown, North Carolina. It impresses them. I have a Charlotte address, but I live in a little small community on the north side of Charlotte called Shuffletown. And basically all it is it's a wide strip in the road that they named it Shuffletown. One time there was a drag strip and a boat landing there. Now both of them's gone and nothing's left except us old rednecks, but I still love calling Shuffletown, North Carolina home. My wife and I have a little farm out there. Now we don't do no farming. But we have a little farm, and we have each other, and you know, it's good to be on the outskirts of Charlotte, because but we ain't got no traffic like you guys got here, I'm telling you. I'll never go home and complain about traffic, you know. Yeah. That right over there is my hero. He shot me through that traffic yesterday, and I was a nervous wreck. But he got me here in ample time, and I'll forever be grateful. And you know, I didn't know what gratitude was when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. I really didn't know what it was prior to Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I got to you people, there was a little old lady in my first home group that had one arm. And she was about 5 foot high, and when she talked, you could see fire coming out of her eyes. And she used to tell me, she'd say, "Boy, you the most ungrateful young man I've ever run up on in my life." She hurt my feelings. But she went on to say, "But I'm going to help you learn what gratitude is." And that's what they did in my first home group. They didn't tell me about gratitude. They showed me. She showed me about opening doors for little old ladies and smiling at people that I really didn't like and doing some things that I didn't like doing. She showed me those things before she passed on. And I'll forever be grateful. And then there was a guy right up here. When I first got sober, he was in San Antonio, Texas. And he gave me a story. You know what he did? He told me the same story. He told me the same thing Miss Juanita did. He said, "You're the most ungrateful young man I've ever seen in my life." He hurt my feelings. But he gave me a story, and he had never come back and told me to quit telling this story, so I always tell it. And one reason I tell it because it's about me. And the other reason I tell it is I love the sound of laughter in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Laughter is a healing part of my sobriety, and I love to hear it. If your home group, if they don't laugh, make them laugh. You know, I like to be serious, but, make them laugh. But the story, what it was, is there's a little guy in San Antonio. He had a table set up in front of the Dixie 5 and Dime store back years ago, and he sold pencils for a living. And every day this gentleman, he sold pencils, 10 cents a piece. And every day this gentleman would come by, he'd lay a dime down on the table, he'd smile at the young man, and he'd turn and walk away. Never would take one of his pencils, every day. Became a habit. He'd do the same thing. He'd come by, put his dime on the table, turn around, smile at the young pencil salesman. He'd walk away. Never took a pencil. And this went on for a while. And finally, one day, he went through the same routine. And when he put his dime down on the table and started to walk away, the little pencil salesman said, "Sir, I need to tell you something." He said, "I know what you want to know, son. You want to know why every day I put a dime on your table and I never take one of your pencils." He said, "No, sir, Mr. Odom. So what I need to tell you is starting tomorrow, pencils will be going up to 15 cents. Now, that's the kind of gratitude I had when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. You let something good happen to me, and I'm going to take full credit for it. But you let something bad happen to me, and I got to find somebody to blame. I am a blamer, and I can still fall right back in that blaming suit today if I'm not careful. That's the reason I need a sponsor. That's the reason I need a home group that I'm attending on a regular basis. That's the reason I need a circle of friends in Alcoholics Anonymous that know me better than anybody else. But most of all, that's the reason I need a program of action that I'm responsible for, just like I was when I was pouring that stuff in me for a lot of the years. About 29 years, I poured that stuff down my throat. So I have to take my own actions today. I am grateful, and I tell you, if you're not grateful and you don't cherish your sobriety, if you're new or used, just hang around, and one day you're going to be probably saying the same thing that little old stupid boy from Charlotte was saying from behind that podium that night, how grateful you are to be sober today. I'm grateful, and I cherish my sobriety, and the reason I'm here today is not because I'm a good speaker. I'm not here because I'm a poster child for Alcoholics Anonymous by all means, even though I thought I was for a long time. The reason I'm here is I'm desperate. I'm desperate, and I don't want to die drunk. I do not want to die drunk. And this is the very least I could do, is to get off of my can and come to Houston, Texas, and share my experience, strength, and hope with you folks if it'll help me stay sober one more day. And I'll forever be grateful. If I could, I'd like to take you back to early 1996. I was in and around Alcoholics Anonymous, and I mean around the outskirts. Now, I was going to meetings every day, and I was drinking your coffee. I was eating your cookies and spitting crumbs. And if you asked me a question about staying sober, I had all the answers. I just didn't know how to stay sober myself. See, I was on the outskirts of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was doing just enough to say I was going to AA. And I don't know how it is in Houston, Texas, but I know how it is in Charlotte, North Carolina. On the outskirts of Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm missing out the whole deal. I'm not getting anything out of that program except what I like to call sobriety. I had a little bit of sobriety. What happened to me after going to meetings 2 or 3 months and not doing a thing about it except showing up and getting out, not participating, not paying attention, I found myself on a Sunday morning. Around 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning, I was rolling around in the carpet in my living room floor, just like I had done prior to getting to Alcoholics Anonymous when I was in DTs. And I told my little wife that Sunday morning that something was going to change in our house that day, right then. I was either going to drink or die. And I didn't care which one came first. I had to have some relief for what was going on inside of me. See, here I'd had them couple months and hadn't poured anything in me to change the way I feel. And I hadn't done anything in Alcoholics Anonymous to change the way that I feel or thought. And I was dying inside. And I didn't know what to do. I did not know what to do. What I had heard was some of the old timers talk about, they kept talking about praying to that God that they knew about. And I was desperate that Sunday morning. I got down on my knees in that carpet that Sunday morning and I called out to the God that I know about today. And I didn't ask that God for any miracles. I didn't ask God for any relief. What I asked Him for were some directions. Please just give me some directions on what to do next, because I do not want to die drunk. I got a sister-in-law that had been sober at that time in this program for 8 years, and she had taken me to a couple of meetings. About 20 miles north of Charlotte, there's a little old country meeting called the Denver Group of Alcoholics Anonymous, and their good nights, they would have 40 people, and it would tickle them to death. It was an old country meeting, and there was an old guy sat right in the front door of that meeting. He was in a straight back chair. He wore dicky coveralls, and he had hands about twice the size of a normal man. And he was ungodly, the ugliest man I had ever seen in my life. And he sat right at that front door, and every time I would start in that meeting, he would stick that big hand out. He'd say, "My name's Dean Hager, and I'm an alcoholic. Welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. We need you, boy." And I thought that was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard in my life. Now, why would that old man need me? Every time Jan would take me to that meeting, that old man would be sitting in that same straight back chair with them same dicky coveralls on, and that big hand stuck out, and he would say the same thing. "My name's Dean Hager, and I'm an alcoholic. Welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. We need you, boy." Well, I could see right then that old man was serious about this A&A stuff. And I could see right then that he had something that I did not want at the time. I was scared to death of that old man. But I'm going to tell you what, folks, I'm borderline genius. I figured it out. Now, I could go around and go in the side door of that meeting hut where the coffee maker went in, and I wouldn't have to go by that old man. And it worked for a little while, till that Sunday morning. When I got up off of my knees in that carpet that Sunday morning when I'd cried out to God, all I could see was Dean's ugly face and that big hand. And what I know today, that was the hand of Alcoholics Anonymous reaching out to me, and I didn't have a clue. Now, my wife looked his name and number up in the book, and I called that old man up that Sunday morning at 8 o'clock. And I told him what was going on in my life and what I was feeling. And that old man took the time out of his Sunday morning to listen to me whine and cry on the phone. And I explained to him why I was calling him. And, you know, he told me some things that had happened to him prior to getting Alcoholics Anonymous. He went on to tell me some things that had happened to him after he got to Alcoholics Anonymous. And he told me that if I was willing to do a few things that was going to be very uncomfortable to me, just maybe, he and I together could get together with that big book and that 12 and 12, and we could stay sober together one day at a time. And you know, that blew my mind. What I was looking to hear from him was, you got to do this, and you've got to do that, and you've got to do this, but he didn't say that. He said, we'll take that big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and we'll take the 12 and 12, and we can maybe stay sober together. It was all about both of us staying sober. What a gift. What a gift. I got my books and I went to that old man's house and we started this journey. And he couldn't read and write real good. He was a pulpwood guy. He was a hard-working man. He cut pulpwood for a living. But Dean had two things that I didn't have. One, he had a God that he believed was helping him stay sober one day at a time. The other thing, Dean, he was happy. He was reasonably happy. He was ugly, but he was reasonably happy. And I wanted those things so bad. I wanted those things so bad. And you know, I started this journey with him, and he spoon-fed me. He spoon-fed me Alcoholics Anonymous as outlined in the big book to the best of his ability. And I'll forever be grateful to him. And you know, if you've got an old-timer in your life, and I tell you what, if you've got old-timers in your home group, you know, in Charlotte, you know, Charlotte's a big city like it's not as big as Houston, but we got a lot of meetings. And one of the first things you hear in a discussion meeting or some of the meetings you go to is the newcomer is the most important person in the room. And I'll agree with that. I'll agree with that. We need newcomers coming in this room to keep this blood aflow in Alcoholics Anonymous, this legacy going. But I always like to stop and take 1 minute to say thank God for the old-timers. Thank God for those old-timers that keep bringing that message of hope back to this room and bring it here where I can see it. You know, I can talk to anybody on the phone. But these old-timers that keep coming and bringing that message back to these rooms, I thank God. And I try to tell the old-timers in my home group how much I need them and how much I love them. And I hope you do too. I hope you do too, because without them, there wouldn't be any Alcoholics Anonymous. What a gift. You know, Dean sponsored me through those steps, and he took me around. He'd take me to meetings, and I never could understand why we just couldn't go to the local meeting there at Denver, you know. He had to take me out of town meetings and show me off like a little Chihuahua dog, you know. Yeah, look what I got now. Look at this one. He's brand new. It's brand new. Send me to get him a cup of coffee, and he didn't even drink coffee, you know. I slammed his truck door one night, and he called me back. He said, "Boy, thank God you didn't break my car window." He said, "I would have killed you." And I believe he would have. I really did. But thank God for people like Dean Hager. Dean died in a nursing home, and I had to move to Charlotte, and I got a new sponsor. And I thank God every day that somebody would take their time out of their life to share their life with me and help me direct mine. And I've always, you know, I hear people that come in the rooms, and newcomers, and some used people too, they always talking about they're a victim. Well, I'm a victim of good sponsorship. And it may not show sometimes, but I'm a victim of good sponsorship. I've always had good sponsorship since I came to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'll forever be grateful for that. And if you're sitting here tonight and you're new or used and you don't have a sponsor, I beg you, please, get you one before you go out them back doors back there. It sure makes me sleep good at night to know that I don't have but half of this burden to carry now. I got somebody carrying the other half with me that knows a little bit about it. See, I told you I was borderline genius. But it didn't work when I come to Alcoholics Anonymous. I had to scratch all that out of the way. I was born on January 18th, 1954, into an alcoholic home in a little town of Huntersville, North Carolina. That's about 22 and a half miles north of Charlotte. Now, my father, he was a plumber by trade, but he was a chronic alcoholic. And I can stand behind here today and tell you he was a chronic alcoholic. The longest period of time I ever saw my father dry was the 3 days he lay at rest when we was waiting to bury him. That's the longest I ever saw him dry in my lifetime was those 3 days. One other thing about my father, I never heard him tell anybody, nobody, especially not me, that he loved them. Now, if you don't tell a little kid every once in a while that you love them, they're just going to assume that you don't love them. And if you don't love me, I don't love you either. I drug that to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous some 29 years later. Now, if you'd have asked me along the way, I'd have told you, no, I don't know what you're talking about. But I did. I drug that to, and you know, thank God for good sponsorships. When I started going through those steps and did that inventory with my sponsor, he explained to me that what my father was suffering from was the same disease that I suffer from today, except his was untreated alcoholism. And I thought he was just a mean, ugly man, and I hated everything about him and everything he stood for until the day we buried him. Thank God for good sponsorship. See, my sponsor at that time, he went with me to my father's gravesite when he died. And, you know, I wrote my sponsor, my dad a letter, and my sponsor hugged me, and we cried together, and I'm okay with that today. Thank God for Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, what a gift. What a gift this is. My mother, she was just the opposite. She was a good Baptist church-going woman. She worked all day long in a cotton mill. She'd come home in the afternoon, she'd put on a nurse's uniform, she'd go to Huntersville Hospital and work to midnight every day in and day out, 7 days a week. Weekends, she'd work 2 shifts at that hospital. She'd double shift on the weekend. And I asked her one time when I was about 10 years old, I said, Mom, why are you doing that? You're killing yourself. What I failed to tell you was when I come along, I was a Saturday night mistake. I had 2 brothers and a sister that when I came along, they were already grown. They'd already had families, had jobs, and lost families, and lost jobs. When I was 10 years old, my sister had been in every drug and alcohol rehab in the state of North Carolina that would have her. My oldest brother was living on the streets of Charlotte, and my middle brother was living on the streets of Danville, Virginia. And they were so much older than me, I didn't know them that well. I was, like I said, I was a Saturday night mistake. And my mother, she said, when I asked her that question, she said, well, I want you to have the things that your brothers and sisters never had. Well, I like things, especially when I don't have to do anything for them. I understood that. She said, you know, those people at that hospital need me, and I love helping people. And I understood that because anybody knew my mother loved her. She was a good woman. She just about loved me to death. And she said the other thing is, as long as I'm at that cotton mill working or I'm at that hospital working, I don't have to put up with your father's bull crap. I knew what she was talking about. See, when I was 10, 11 years old, we lived in an old plank house at 108 Church Street in Huntersville. And this time of night, you could see a car coming a half a mile down the road through the cracks in the old planks. But my mom did the best she could possibly do at the time. And my mom and I would have to sleep together, and we'd have to put our clothes on, shoes, and sometimes our coats and hats. Because somewhere in the middle of the night, my dad was going to come in a blackout, and I didn't have a clue what a blackout was as a young'un. He'd either have a knife or a gun chasing my mom around the house as if he was trying to kill her, and we'd have to run to a neighbor's house or to her brother's house or to a cousin's house. And this wasn't just this was not just every once in a while. This was day in and day out. And there for a while, as a youngin', you know, it was kind of an adventure, knocking on a different door every night, sleeping in a different bed every night, and then it got downright embarrassing. I remember a Saturday night as well if it was tonight. It was pouring rain and storming, and my dad coming in a blackout, and he beat my mom with a piece of garden hose he'd picked up in the front yard. And we were running in the rain to her brother's house, and my mother was screaming and crying. And I was screaming and crying too. I'll never forget it. And when we stepped up on the porch of that old house, I told my mom with all my heart and all my well-being, I said, Mom, if I ever get a family, they're not going to have to go through anything like this. You know, I can stand behind here today and tell you that my family hadn't had to go through anything like that yet. But when I swung through the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, not only was I acting like my father, I was reacting like my father. Richard's Wild Irish Rose was the drink of the day, no matter whether I stole it or bought it or where it come from. I was just like, if not worse than the man that I hated more than anything else I'd ever hated in my life. I was just like him. Thank God for Alcoholics Anonymous. So when I turned 13 years old, we lived in a small town of Huntersville, and now there's 300,000 people in that town because they backed the lake up, and there's a big Lake Norman up there, 500 miles of shoreline. At that time, there was a little river run by the town, and when I grew up, there was 3,000 people lived in the town of Huntersville. Everybody knew everybody's business. Everybody knew my daddy was a town drunk. Everybody knew that my mom was supporting that entire family, and we was laying back on our lazy butts doing nothing. Everybody knew our business, and I hated that town. I hated it because everybody knew all our business. When I turned 13 years old, I had hair down to the crack of my butt. I had the first pair of Beetle boots in the town of Huntersville, North Carolina. I had Tom Jones shirts and bell-bottom breeches, and I thought I was something now. Now, they put me on a bus and bused me to a middle school out of town, and see, we never had any authority in my house. See, my dad didn't care whether I lived or died as long as he had a quarter on a bottle of wine. And my mom, she couldn't keep up with me and work 2 jobs 7 days a week, so there was no discipline in my house. And I didn't like going to school, and I didn't go very much. One of the days I went to school, though, I'd strut down the halls of that school and had that hair tucked in my jean pockets. And I had them 6-inch heels on them Beetle boots, and there wasn't anybody like me. I was unique in my own mind. And you know, I ran into a guy one day, and he had long hair too, and he had some Beetle boots, and he lived in the next town over called Cornelius, North Carolina, and we became friends because we were the only two unique people in that school in our own minds. His brothers had a band called the Young Ages. They was one of the first rock and roll bands to make any money out of our part of the Charlotte area. And these old boys my mom had seen them grow up. And they'd bought them an old Sunbeam bread truck and had it painted up, had flowers on the side of it, and had their name on it, the Young Ages. And you know, we lived 22 and a half miles from Charlotte in Huntersville. And I had never been to Charlotte but one time in my entire life because we never had a car in our family. And I hated that town. I wanted away from Huntersville so bad. Well, my mom let me start running with them old boys. She watched them boys grow up, and she knew that they come from good families, good stock. And so we started riding with them. My friend Rusty and I would ride with them. We'd set up their equipment, and I watched these guys bringing this stuff in today. And we was doing all that grunt work for them, you know. And once they played it, they'd be out there smoking cigarettes and drinking beer and getting girls. And we'd be behind the scenes working the lights, and I was having the time of my life. I was out of Huntersville. We'd go to the little towns around Huntersville and Charlotte and Winston-Salem and Greensboro, North Carolina, and nobody knew my daddy was the town drunk. Nobody knew my mom was supporting the whole family. Nobody knew my business, and I was tickled to death. Well, this went on for a couple months, and I was having a good time, and Rusty came to school one day. He said, "Randy, this is fun, but what we need to do is start our own band." I said, "Good God, Rusty, we can't even play the radio." He said, "Look at them. A year ago, they couldn't either, and look at them now." And Rusty was one of these guys that if he started something during the day, he was going to finish it before he went to bed that night. Now, I had never finished anything in my life, never. I said, "Rusty, what I need to do?" And he told me, and I caught Mom between jobs that day, and I told her, I said, "Mom, then this is a matter of life or death. I need a set of drums." And it had been a long time since I seen that old woman laugh that hard. She said, "Honey, you couldn't play them if you had 2 sets of drums." I said, "Mom, this is not a laughing matter. This is serious business." And you know, my mother was a good old country woman, a hard-working Christian woman, and she commenced to telling me, you know, well, we can't buy groceries, we can't pay the fire bill, we can't do. Well, this is about me. I don't care whether I don't care if we don't never eat again. You know, they can cut the power off tomorrow. I don't care. See, it's about Randy. It's always been about me ever since I come out of the womb. And it can still be about me. That's the reason I need a sponsor. That's the reason I need a home group. And most of all, that's the reason I need this program of action called Alcoholics Anonymous, because I can fall right back into that. I was sitting over here, it was all about me a few minutes ago when my friend Jess was up here introducing me. So I can fall right back there in a heartbeat if I'm not careful. Well, I thought I had lost a battle with my mom. She got to telling me that sad story, you know, and finally I went into one of them fits like you can do, crying and blowing old snot everywhere, you know, and screaming. And you know, in about 45 minutes, my mother went and drew every dime she had in the credit union out and got her sister to drive us 22 and a half miles into Charlotte. We brought home the finest set of Ludwig drums they had on the showroom floor at Tillman Music Center. And when we got them back to Huntersville, I could have beat on a wash tub and made as much sense as I did those drums. They just some things some people can't do, and I could not play those drums and could not comprehend playing those drums. And you know, my friend Rusty showed up the next day with a new Gibson Les Paul guitar. We commenced to practicing, and the more we practiced, the worse we got. And you know, he did me just like y'all did when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. He'd shake his head. He'd say, "Keep trying, it's going to get better." And I knew it wasn't going to get better. And I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to do like I'd done everything else in my life. I wanted to quit and do something else. And he kept saying, "Just try it, give it one more day." And this was about the Vietnam era, and there was some old boys riding around town in Huntersville in an old Chevrolet they'd stole. Well, they had dodged a draft, and they come up there to where we called ourselves practicing, and they said, "Look, we don't have much equipment. We hadn't got any money, but we can play a little bit. Do y'all want to hook up with us? Well, we had nothing to lose. We had to hook up with somebody. We was going downhill. You know, my friend Rusty, you know, and I hooked up with them, and sure enough, they could play a song here and a song there, and I'd beat a little harder, and they'd turn the music up a little louder, and I'd beat a little harder. Finally, one day, they got tired of it, and one of them old boys went out to the car, that old Chevrolet, and he brought in a sack full of king-size Budweisers. Now, I don't know where he got them, but I know they stole them. They didn't have any money. He had hauled them around in the back of that car so long, the writing on the Budweiser cans had done wore off. It was just silvery-like, you know. You couldn't even read it where it said Budweiser. And he popped the top on one of those cans and handed it to me. He said, Randy, if you'll drink this, it'll help you pick up that beat. And, you know, as he handed me that, I thought about, no. I said, I've seen what this stuff will do to my dad. I seen my sister in them drying out places, in them drug rehabs. And I seen my old brothers, you know, hauling around people and them old beer cans rattling around in the back seat of their car when they had one that would run. But you know what I failed to see was that look on my mother's face. That look of disgust on my mother's face when the ambulance would come up and get my sister. Or that look of disgust on my mother's face when the police would bring my daddy home and throw him out instead of taking him to jail. That look, I hope I never ever see on another woman's face again. I didn't even think about it, and I chugged that Budweiser just as fast as I could make it go down. And when that Budweiser hit my belly, that Magic Elixir hit my belly, he handed me another one. And I chugged it right behind it, just as fast as I could make it go down. And it was kind of like my old friend up in Dobson, North Carolina, used to say years ago. He used to say, it's like I swallowed an umbrella, and it opened up inside of me. That night, them old boys didn't have to wait on Randy. Anything they wanted to play, they didn't have to tell me to pick up the beat. I was ready to go. I was a rock star that night in my own mind. See, what I know today without a shadow of a doubt that my disease is centered in my head. And I know today without a shadow of a doubt that I didn't play those drums with them two Budweisers in my belly any better than I did prior to putting them in there. But in my mind, I was a rock star. And you know what? When I left that practice hut that day, I seen why my daddy was like. I knew why he couldn't come home when he had a quarter on another bottle of wine. I knew why my sister stayed where she wanted to do in those alcohol and drug rehabs. And I knew why my old brothers laid drunk on the streets now. The people that I despised and was so much ashamed of, two king-size Budweisers turned me toward them instead of away from them. Right then, I wanted to be just like the rest of my family. I loved what the Budweiser and what that Magic Elixir done for me from the word go. And you know, I'd take the $3 my mother leave me for lunch money, and I'd take it to the corner and get Wino Bill to get me two king-size Budweisers every day. He'd get me two king-size Budweisers, and he'd get to keep the change. And this went on for about 2 weeks, and you know, every day, you know, I'd drink those Budweisers real quick, and some days I'd go to school, and some days I wouldn't. But what happened to me was, on about 2 weeks, I give Wino Bill my $3, and I didn't know he was a businessman. I thought he was a wino. I give him my $3, and he looked at me. He said, you know, you can get 6 blue ribbons for what you're paying for 2 Budweisers. Well, good God, I didn't go to school, and I know 6 is better than 2. So he started getting me 6 blue ribbons every morning, and I'd drink those blue ribbons, and when that buzz would wear off, I'd steal things out of my mom's house and take them to the corner and sell them at the pawn shop. I'd take pictures off the wall. I'd take her irons and curling irons, and when it come down to it, I'd steal money out of her pocketbook, anything to keep that buzz going. I loved what that Magic Elixir done for me. You know, I gave those guys those drums that my mother was still making payments on and told them to stay away from me, get out of my life. I had found something way more important than them and their music, and it's that Magic Elixir that come in them bottles and cans, and for them just to leave me alone. 13 years old, I became a daily drinker, and I done a lot of things between 13 and 18 years old to keep that buzz going that I'm not going to stand here and tell you about. I went through it with two sponsors, and, you know, I've made amends for some of that stuff, but there's a lot of things I'm not proud of that I've done to keep that buzz going, because if there was a such thing as an instant alcoholic, when that Budweiser hit my belly that day, an alcoholic was born, because I loved it. I loved what it did to me. I loved what it was doing for me at the time, and I didn't want to live without it. I thought that was the only way in the world to live and be happy. And you know, I turned 16 years old, and my mother, she was not, like I say, she was a good country woman, and she just didn't understand why all the kids my age in the neighborhood they was getting driver's license, learner's permits, and I explained to her in a general way, you know, that you got to go to school before you can take driver's ed. She went down to the cotton mill, and she talked to them at the cotton mill about what would y'all do if y'all had a son like me that couldn't get any driver's license, that was drinking like a fish and stealing, you know. And there's a guy named John told her about a place in downtown Charlotte called Queen City Driving School. If you pay $250 cash money and you show up for 2 weeks consecutively, you're going to get a set of North Carolina State driver's license. I had never done anything in my life 2 weeks consecutively. My mother put that $250 up, and I hitchhiked, caught trailways. I rode a motorcycle one time on the back with a fella. Anything it took me to get to Charlotte 2 weeks, I was going to get me some driver's license. And I passed that course easy. All it took was them $100 bills. I gave them the money and got me some North Carolina State driver's license. And, you know, driver's license ain't no good if you ain't got a car. And ain't nobody going to loan you no car in a small town of Huntersville, because they done seen me riding around in the back seat of the sheriff's car, laid on the corner with wino bill, so they wasn't going to loan me no car. I wasn't any better off. God bless my mother. She came in one Saturday morning. She laid $225 down on the kitchen table. And Mr. Buck, God bless Mr. Buck. Mr. Buck used to say, that old woman shouldn't have give y'all cash money. She knew you was drunks. But she gave us $225 cash money, and she said, honey, I want you to go see if you can find you an old car. And it's the first time I ever remember in my life ever saying, okay, Mom, if it'll make you happy. It's always been if it'd make me happy. She said that would make me happy, and she got to the door, and she turned around, and she said, John down at the cotton mill said, a Volkswagen is a good, safe, economical car. I said, a Volkswagen it'll be, Mom. She left, and we grabbed our sack of beer, and we hit the road, and we headed out hunting a car. And the first place we came to was a place in Davidson, North Carolina, called Kathy Hoyle Funeral Home. Old man Kathy was pushing a white 59 model Pontiac hearse out into the front of his place. That thing was beautiful. It was white, had red curtains, had a 3-speed on the column with a 400 Pontiac motor in it. I told Rusty, I said, let's see what's going on here. And we wheeled in there, and I asked Mr. Kathy, I said, what you going to do with this old thing? He said, I'm going to sell it, son. I've bought me a new hearse. I said, well, I sure would like to have it. What you going to ask for it? He said, $225. It was like somebody rung the church bell next door. I said, well, I want to buy that car. He said, no, son, I can't sell you that car. You ain't big enough to drive it. It had a steering wheel that big. I'm not kidding. And you know, I went into my conning stage, and I conned that old man into selling me that hearse for $225, and he was a notary, and he'd done all the paperwork and stuff on it. And I said, well, I'll come back and get it just as soon as I get me a tag and some insurance. He said, oh, I'll just take it on my tag and bring it back when you get yours. Well, I'm going to tell you what, folks, we didn't live in no swanky neighborhood. When I turned in that neighborhood, windows went to shutting. Doors went to slamming, and that Baptist church-going woman come out, and I heard things come out of her mouth that I did not know she had in her vocabulary. She was screaming so loud that I couldn't make out. I did make out she was talking about getting it out of the yard and getting her money back. I just pulled off and left her standing there. 2 weeks later, I had my mom in that hearse, and we was like Maud and Harold. She loved that thing. I would pick her up at the cotton mill and take her to the beauty parlor, and then we'd leave the beauty parlor, and I'd shoot her up to the emergency room at the hospital, you know. And those nurses just had a time with her and that riding in that hearse. And, you know, she loved that hearse to death. She loved riding in that thing. And, you know, it was white and had red curtains on it, so we painted on the back trunk lid of it, only the strong survive. But that was my drunk car, and that was my drunk car. My mom just about loved me to death. And, you know, we run that. And, you know, I had gotten at that particular time, I'd gotten to where I thought I was taking naps. See, what I was doing, I got to where I was drinking that old bottom shelf wine. They put that Richard's Wild Irish Rose in the orange driver and stuff. down low in the 7-Elevens where people like me could get to it to steal it. You know, and I was stealing that old orange driver wine, and what I thought I was doing was taking naps, but I know now I was blacking out. And I'd go into a blackout, and when I'd come to, the keys would be hanging in that old hearse, and it'd be full of gas. Wouldn't nobody touch it. They was scared to death of that thing in that little town where I lived. Old man run a pool room, and instead of locking up for dinner, he'd get me to park at the front door, and he'd just leave the door standing open because wouldn't nobody go in there. They was scared of that old hearse. But, you know, that was my drunk car, I tell you, and my mom and I drove the wheels off of that thing. My brother, I've got to move on here. My brother from Danville, Virginia, wanted to move back home. He was about to die on the streets up there in Danville, Virginia, and I didn't want him to come back home because I knew my mother couldn't afford both of us. He came anyway, and what we found out when he moved back to Huntersville, North Carolina, that we were just alike. The only difference was our age. You know, we were both manipulators. We were cons and thieves and drunks. And, you know, we'd steal everything we could from my poor mom, her working 2 jobs, and we'd buy us a half-gallon of old cheap, whatever the cheapest liquor we could find is, and we'd set it up in the seat of that hearse. And we'd ride out in the country, and we'd drink that liquor, and me and him would bond. I mean, we would talk about things that never, ever happened. But when that magic elixir in that bottle, when that magic stuff would run out, we could not stay in the same room together. We hated each other so bad. The only thing that bonded us and made us brothers was that brown stuff in that bottle, and that's the only thing that kept us together. What happened was him and my older brother, they had picked up a lady of the night one Saturday morning and in Charlotte, and they were going to take her swimming over at the river, which is nearby our house, and they come to where I was staying at my mother's house and wanted me to drive them because they had been drinking. Well, I told them, I said, I'm not getting in the car with that woman. Now, they had never stopped me before. But I wasn't getting in the car. She just didn't look just right to me. And I wasn't getting in the car with her. And they got mad, and we had a few words, and they sped off. And I ran in the house like little ones will do. And the next time I got to see my 2 brothers, and I went down to Charlotte Memorial Hospital in a couple hours. There my mother stood. One of them was dead, and the other one was dying. They got 2 blocks and hit head-on with a tractor-trailer truck. And there I was, about drunk that Saturday morning. And my mother was standing there looking at one of her kids dead and the other one was dying. And I thought to me, if I would have took them, if I would have got in that car and drove them, this wouldn't have happened. This would not happen. See, I know today, without a shadow of a doubt, everything happens in God's world for a reason. But at that particular day, this alcoholic was looking for another reason to pour something down his throat. Because every time I shut my eyes, all I could see was my mother standing there looking at one of her kids dead and the other one dying. This is a family disease. And if you're sitting here and you are used, and you think this thing's just about you, please listen just a minute. Let me tell you a little bit about my family. This particular Friday night before this Saturday morning, we lived across the street in Huntersville from the American Legion, which had a bar. And it was like the meetings in Charlotte used to be. About 8 o'clock on Friday night or any night, they'd open the door to let a little bit of smoke out where they could see who all was in the bar. And this particular Friday night prior to this, a Saturday morning, they'd open the door to let some smoke out. And 2 of the guys sitting at the end of the bar saw my dad. He blacked out and passed out. And they ran out there and drug him off of the railroad track just as the train took his legs off. And then this Saturday morning, after my brothers and I had had this little argument about this lady of the night, there's a phone call came to her house for her, and I took the phone call. It was from a dry-out center, a drug rehab in Memphis, Tennessee. My sister had raised so much Cain up there and caused so much mischief, they had to put her out. And there she was on the streets of Memphis, Tennessee. So here I was with my sister on the streets of Memphis. One of my brothers dead, the other one dying. And these guys had pulled my dad off the railroad track, and I was standing there about drunk looking at the look on my mother's face in that hospital. And I thought to myself, Randy, what is wrong with you and your family? See, I'd never heard of the word Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd never heard of anybody called an alcoholic. Now, I've heard my daddy called a lot of things, but never been called an alcoholic. And I'd never heard of anything like that. And every time I shut my eyes, I could see that whole family, how disgusting it was. But what hurt me more than seeing my dead brother and seeing my sister and seeing my father was that look on my mother's face. That look on her face, I just could not get it out of my mind. And I couldn't drink it to make it go away. And I left that hospital, and if you had something in a bag that you was drinking, I wouldn't ask you what the content was or how much it cost. Please just let me help you drink it. I got to get rid of this feeling. I've got to get it to go away. And it would not go away. And that's the closest I ever come to anything, accomplishing anything prior to getting to Alcoholics Anonymous, was just about drinking myself to death. Because I felt like that was the only way that I was going to get rid of that feeling and those thoughts that was going through my head. You know, a couple weeks later, my mother had taken care of the funerals, and my dad ended up dying. My sister got back in another drug rehab over in Tennessee, and my mother came to me, and she said, honey, I think you need to find a job. I thought I was going to pass out right there in her house. I said, Mom, I can't find no job. She said, I think I found you one. She laid a man's name and number down on a piece of paper. She said, I think he's hiring. And it's the second time I ever remember in my life saying, Mom, if it'll make you happy, I'll do this. And she said, that would make me happy. Now, I went to that. It was a construction job, and it was on it was on August 27th of 1971, that construction job. And I had a Myrtle Beach 69 T-shirt on, had them Beetle boots on, had my hair tucked in my jean pockets, and I was driving that big white hearse, and I pulled in that construction job, and the man said, we're not hiring. I said, thank you, God. He gave me a piece of paper. He said, fill this out if we ever need anybody like you. And I still got a resentment at that man about this like you. He said, we'll call you. And so I put my name and social security number down there, and I tipped outside to get in my hearse, and he caught me before I left. He said, we've made an exception. We're going to hire one more person. I thought I was going to die right there in that man's parking lot. But I remember what I told Mom, and I said, I'll take this job, and I'll give it 1 week. I'll try it. And that's the hardest thing I ever done in my life, folks, was try to work an 8-hour shift without putting something in my body to change the way I feel. Because I had drank daily since I was 13 to then. And here I was, you know, trying to make that job. And I'd go into DTs around 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, and I was working with some guys that just got out of the Marine Corps, and they'd seen people in their travels around the country like me, and they would watch for me so I could sneak off of that job and run and get me a pint of wine to do me to lunchtime. And then at lunchtime, I'd get me 6 beers to get me through the afternoon. That's the only way I could make an 8-hour shift. You know, that guy came to me that I was working for after working there about 2 or 3 weeks. He said, Randy, we like you, and we love you to stay here, but you can't stay here and drink the way you drink. You can't drink on our job like this. I remember standing in the shower in the mornings before time to go to work with that hot water running down over my head, knowing good and well that if I don't put something in my body to change the way I feel right now, this is the very best I'm going to feel all day, standing there in that shower. And you know, it took me a long time before I could make an 8-hour shift without putting something in my body, but I was able to do it, but I drank just as soon as I got off from that afternoon to the time to go back the next morning. I met the lady that I'm married to today on that job. And I need to say this before I go any further. I wouldn't have stayed with that woman 15 minutes if she would have treated me like I treated her. I wouldn't have stayed with her 15 minutes. I treated her. The first 15 years of our marriage was pure hell. See, when we met and we started going out, I didn't want a girlfriend nor a wife. I wanted a driver. I didn't want to get no DWI, and I just wanted a driver. And you know what happens was we got to hanging around together, and at the time I think we fell in lust, and then it ended up it was love. And I'm gonna tell you what, she's the apple of my eye today. I just got off the phone with her before I came in here, and I hate she can't be here with me because I don't like to travel without her. She's the best thing that ever happened to me other than Alcoholics Anonymous. That woman loves me, and I love her. And, she's not just my wife. She's my partner and my teammate. And we do this thing together one day at a time, And what a gift it's been. But I wouldn't have stayed with her 15 minutes. And we ended up going out, and finally we got married. And all my mother ever wanted was a little grandbaby. And, even a drunk like me, they can say a squirrel can find a nut every once in a while, And my wife came up pregnant. And when my daughter was born, I was blacked out and passed out in the seat of my truck at the hospital. I couldn't even get in the hospital to the delivery room. And that was the pattern that I started the first 10 years of my daughter's life. I can't stand behind this podium and tell you that I ever loved my daughter or told her that I loved her or held her. I can't say that we ever did any father-daughter things. I know we did, but it always revolved around me because it's all about me. And I was in the middle of my disease at the time, and if her and her mother made it in life, that was good for them. They were on their own. You know, when my daughter started to school, she started to school on handmade clothes. My wife made her clothes to start to school with, and I was across the street at the American Legion Plaza with a pocket full of money, making big bucks, but I wouldn't give them the money because I needed it to drink on. And I know today that them kids made fun of her when she went to school, you know, because kids can be cruel today. And, you know, it was all about Randy. They caught me right in the middle of my disease. When my daughter was 5 years old, we lived in a big house at 108 Church Street, and that's all it was a house. It wasn't a home, it was a house. And she would pass me in the hall, and she'd look down at her feet in disgust because she didn't know what her daddy stood for. She didn't know which daddy was coming home that day. See, by this time, I was spending more money on alcohol than I was making, and we'd had to shut the curtains and take the phone off the hook because the bill collectors was calling, you know, wanting their money. And Mr. Buck used to say, boy, they was wanting their money, not yours. They was wanting theirs. But, you know, I had it figured out. They go to bed about 10 o'clock, and then we could put the phone back on the hook, you know. Well, my daughter thought every family lived like that. She thought everybody in that community was like that, shut the curtains and not let outside what was going on in our house. I was sitting on a tow truck one day in Richmond, Virginia with Kyle Petty. Kyle and I have been friends for a long time. We were talking about growing up, you know, and kids. And you know, Kyle said, you know, when I was in the first grade, he said, I used to bring kids home with me from school, and the first thing they'd want to do was see my daddy's race car. He said, I thought everybody's daddy had a race car. You know, my daughter thought everybody's daddy on the block was a drunk like me, that they had the phone off the hook, that the curtains was closed until bedtime. Thank God she don't have to live like that today. You know, I had the opportunity not too long ago to speak at a little thing somewhere in Charlotte. My daughter, she just insisted. She's 28 years old and pregnant now, but she just insisted to go. And when we started home, she said, Daddy, I want to tell you something. Those things that you said you did or you didn't do, I don't remember them or I blanked them out. She said, all I know today is the Father that Alcoholics Anonymous has gave me and what you stand for today. What a gift. They don't got that at the 7-Eleven. You can't get that at the 7-Eleven. What happened was my mother got sick. She went blind. She couldn't walk. And I was right in the middle of my disease. And what happened was my wife would take care of her. She'd put her to bed at night. She'd clean her house. She'd make sure she took her medicine. She would feed her. Things that I should have been doing, my wife was doing for my mother. But I was in the middle of my disease, and it was all about Randy. It was all about me. One day she called me, and I was one of those days that I had went to work and made an 8-hour shift without putting anything in my body to change the way I feel. And she said, you need to come home. Mom's sick. And I got in my car, and I drove 7 miles from where I worked. And when I got home, they was putting my mother in the ambulance. And I could tell when they put her on the gurney that my mother was dying. I could just see that look in her face. And what I wanted to do is put my arms around her and love her and hug her and tell her how sorry I was for being the son that I had been. But see, I can't say things and do things like that, folks, unless I've got some alcohol in me to give me courage. I didn't have any courage that day. I had a drink, and I couldn't tell my mom those things. I told him, the ambulance driver, to take her on, and I slammed that ambulance door. And I ran in the house, and I got everything that I could find that had alcohol in it. And I got in my car, and my wife drove me behind that ambulance 22.5 miles from Huntersville into Charlotte, and I chugged just as hard as I could chug. And when we got to Charlotte, I got out, that alcohol was working for me again. I was ready to tell Mom those things, and I jumped out at that hospital and jerked that door open, and she was gone. She had died on 77 along the way. Now, I don't tell you that for your sympathy or your pity. I tell you that if you've got somebody in your life that you need to make an amends to, talk to your sponsor maybe, but do it now where you can look them in your eye, when you can put your arm around them and hug them and see that reaction and feel it yourself. See, I had to do it at a gravesite with my sponsor holding me. See, that's what I was willing to do I was willing to do that for another drink of liquor. I was willing to give up telling my mother bye and telling her how much I loved her for another drink of liquor. Now, that's not a bad habit, folks. That's alcoholism. Smoking's a bad habit. That's alcoholism. I was willing to give up those last few minutes with my mother for another drink to change the way I felt. Thank God that I've got an opportunity to be, I was able to get right with my mother, and I know I'm okay with that. And I know she's okay with that. But what a gift. There's people out there that don't have this gift that we've got. There's a lot of people that don't have the gift of good sponsorship and sobriety. And that peace of mind that comes with, I'm okay. I'm okay. And the reason I tell you that is not to make you feel sorry for me, is that you don't have to make those same mistakes if you still got that opportunity, if you want to change. A couple weeks later, my sister had got out of that drug rehab, and we let her move in a little trailer. Now, my friend Jay, that I'm kind of substitute for tonight, he said they're not trailers, they're mobile homes. Well, she was living in a mobile home in behind us, and my little 10-year-old daughter had found her out in the backyard that morning. She was waiting on the school bus and found her out there dead. There she lay out there in the yard, had a fifth of Jack Daniels green label laying on her chest, and her old cat. I was standing at 8 o'clock in the morning that morning looking out my bathroom window with a fifth of Jack Daniels green label. And I'd take a drink, and I was crying, and I'd beat myself in the face while I watched that coroner putting her body in that ambulance. And I said to myself, if I ever get this bad, I'm quitting this mess. I am quitting this mess. 13 days later, I found myself in a treatment facility in Hickory, North Carolina, being treated for chronic alcoholism. And I used to say in my little talk that the only thing that I got out of that treatment facility was 28 days to dry out and a $14,000 big book. But what I know today, without a shadow of a doubt, if they hadn't gave me some structure in that treatment facility, and if they hadn't picked me up by the seat of the britches when I got out of there and set me on Dean Hager's lap in Denver, North Carolina, in that old straight back chair, I would have died just like the rest of my family, drunk. See, my mother didn't darken the doors of Al-Anon because I don't think she ever heard of it. My mother died as a direct result of alcoholism and never had a drink in her body. She allowed us, as her kids and her husband, to take her to that position of death. She died as a direct result of alcoholism and never had to take a drink. This is a family disease. And she allowed that. And that's the reason when I see a lot of these smiling faces in Al-Anon today, I say, thank God. Because, my mother may have had a chance if she had ever heard of Al-Anon. And then again, my mother may have heard of Al-Anon and chose not to do it. I don't know that. But I know today that she's okay with me because I still love my mother. And I still cherish the things that she taught me. The good, she taught me some good. She was a good woman. That daughter of mine, today I try to get to a lot of meetings in Charlotte. Got a lot of guys that help me on a daily basis. I believe in sponsorship. I believe in allowing myself to be sponsored by another man, and I love sponsoring other men. I think that's the key to my sobriety, is staying active and staying in the now. We got a little girl in our home group. She says, just stay in the now. And I didn't know what she was talking about for a long time, but today I know I need to stay in the now. And that's one reason I'm standing here tonight sober, is because I try to stay in the now today. I try to stay with you people, my people. I don't care if y'all are from Texas or where you're from. Y'all are my kind of people. And y'all, this is where I need to be, is right here with you people, because I have been loved back into a new way of life, and I love it today. I retired from that job 2 weeks ago. After 42 years, my mother made me go there. After 42 years, I went to work one Monday and just told them that I was just had enough, and I was going to do something different. And, I had talked to my sponsor about it and talked to my wife about it, and that's the only two people that matter. They both said yes, and you know how us alcoholics are. We looking for that yes. 2 yeses is a right, and So we might be eating grits and taters for a while, but I can always throw it back in her face. See, I'm a blamer. You said do it. You said do it. That daughter of mine, she found her a husband. He's a good man, and I never thought I'd ever see a man that was good enough for my daughter. But I love him to death. He's a firefighter, and he's a good provider, and we're going to have our first grandchild on Christmas week, we hope. So my wife's excited, and you know, I didn't know what love was all about until I got to you people, and y'all showed me love. You taught me how to love and how to be loved and how to accept love. And what a gift it is to be able to be a family, you know, have a family like this, and a daughter that loves me, and she does love me today. And her son-in-law, my son-in-law, he calls me Dad, and he's a great big guy, big guy, and he's a hard-working man. And he says, Dad, I just can't imagine you ever drinking alcohol. I said, John, just don't drink it yourself, you know. You know, just take what you want and leave the rest. But you know, he said, well, I'm going to one of them meetings one of these days with you. I said, and I hadn't brought him yet, but he's wanting to go to one of them meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he's one of them guys from out west. He'll want to lead the meeting if he goes, you know. He's been around me just long enough to want to take charge, you know. He'll want to lead the meeting, but I do love him, and you know, what a gift it is. But you know, I'm going to move on here, and what I want to tell you is that this is a gift. Sobriety is a gift for me, and I'll forever be grateful. And you know, I see a lot of young folks around here, and I got to tell this story because my sponsor tells me that I need to. There's a lot of young people out there probably never even heard of Billy Graham, the evangelist Billy Graham. A lot of young folks have never heard of Billy Graham. Well, out where I come from, Billy Graham is an idol for the people. And my mother, we had a TV that wouldn't get but one channel, and she was going to find Billy Graham if he was on the TV preaching. Well, back a few years ago, they built a new Coliseum in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Billy was doing one of his religious things there at that new Coliseum, and he had had some hard times. His wife had passed away, and he'd been sick, but this particular day, Billy Graham was having a good time. He was having a great day, and he come out of that Charlotte Coliseum that night after the whole thing was over, and he told his limousine driver, he said, look, he said, I feel so good tonight. He said, I want to drive this limousine back to Boone. Well, their headquarters is probably 100 miles from Charlotte, and Billy hadn't driven a car in years. He's always had a chauffeur, you know, and he just turned 95 years old yesterday or Thursday. And anyway, the chauffeur done exactly what he was supposed to do. He throwed him the keys, and he crawled in the back seat. And here they went. Billy got in there and got the seat adjusted, and he decided he'd take the back roads instead of get on the interstate because he hadn't driven in a while. And he was kind of cutting through the little towns, and he was speeding, you know, and having a good time. And he went through Lowell, North Carolina, and a little local cop pulled him over for speeding. Well, Billy rolled the window down, and when he did, the cop run up to the window, and he stuck his head in the window, and he said, sir, did you know you was... He said, oh, my God, wait just a minute. And he ran back to the patrol car, and he called back to the station house, and he told his captain, he said, sir, I pulled a limousine over here for speeding, and there's a very important person in it, and I don't know what to do. He said, what do you mean you don't know what to do? He said, how important is he? He said, is it the mayor? He said, oh, God, no, he's more important than the mayor. He said, well, do you reckon it might be the governor? He said, oh, no, sir, he's more important than the governor. He said, who in the world you think it might be? He said, it must be God. He said, he's hired Billy Graham as his chauffeur. What a gift. What a gift. I love the sound of laughter. I love the sound of laughter. I want to thank all you folks for being here for me and allowing me to be sober another day. Thank y'all for keeping me sober another day. You know, as we trudge this road of happy destiny together one day at a time, let's not forget the source of the power that not only brought us here to the Spirit of Houston tonight, but it keeps me sober one day at a time. And I am grateful for that. I am an alcoholic, and my name's Randy Hagler. God bless you.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down. And then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.